Big breaking news story at this point in time. Novartis's appeal on the cancer drug has been dismissed by the Supreme Court. This verdict will have huge implications for the manufacturing sector, pharmaceutical companies in India and abroad. It's a major decision from the Supreme Court. Remember, Novartis had asked for a patent of the Glivec drug, which is a life-saving cancer drug. This means that cheaper versions of the drug will now be accessible. Let me go across to Atir Khan, who joins us on the phone line. Atir, a huge decision indeed by the Supreme Court.
Well, that's right. It's a huge decision, and it will have a wide-ranging implication, not just in India and even abroad, in terms of people getting life-saving drugs at a cheaper price. We know that Novartis had, this case was pretty old. It dates back to 2006, where the patent authority cited legal provisions of 2005 patent law, aiming to prevent getting fresh patents for making minor changes to existing medicines, a practice known as evergreening. So therefore, the court has taken all into considerations all the factors which are required, and also there was a strong plea from the associations which are working in the patient's interest, and thereafter a decision has been taken to dismiss this application.
All right, Atir, do stay on with us on the phone line. We have Dr. Praveen Garg, a cancer surgeon from Batra Hospital, who's with us on the phone line. Dr. Garg, put into perspective for us how crucial, how big is this decision by the Supreme Court? Dr. Garg, if you can hear me, how crucial is this verdict?
Important.
How crucial is this verdict in terms of availability of cheaper versions of the cancer drug for those suffering from the disease?
Yeah. Now these expensive drugs which are being marketed by multinational companies, now already they are available, but now Indian companies, they will be able to market that with more authentication. And cheaper drugs will be available to poor patients, not only in India, but other poor countries like African countries. Multinational companies were trying to block it, but that implication is there for multinational companies as well, because their incentive to do the research and develop new drug will go down. So there should be some provision so that these companies will continue to get some sort of royalty from the drugs they have invented and now made available to poor patients.
All right, Dr. Garg, thank you very much for putting into perspective for us that. Let me in fact go across to Dr. Agarwal, who joins us from Gangaram Hospital. Dr. Agarwal, this is a huge decision that will impact the lives of many across the country and across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think although Novartis was doing yeoman service by providing free drug to almost 17,000 patients, but certainly generics have a role to play because.
All right, Dr. Agarwal, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts. Let's in fact listen into what the council had to say.
So the new patent cannot be granted because it is just a little modification of the old one.
What does it mean for the generic drug makers in India, ma'am, now with this, the implications on them?
There could be various implications on this. However, one implication is clear that the Indian provision, Section 3D, has been completely upheld, number one. Number two, patents would be granted only for genuine inventions and repetitive patenting will not be allowed.
What is the implication for supply and manufacturing of Glivec?
Yes, the court held that merely because Glivec is more soluble or more stable, it doesn't qualify by itself for patent protection.
What does it mean that when it comes to cheaper drugs in India?
Yes.
What does this judgment mean?
That whatever patents are granted will be only for genuine inventions, and the generic medicines would be available in India and for the world, because India is the pharmacy of the world.
कोर्ट के इस जजमेंट का क्या मतलब निकाला जाए कि सस्ती दवाइयां मिलेंगी?
कोर्ट के इस जजमेंट से ये मतलब निकला जाता है, दो मतलब है. एक तो जो पेटेंट है वो एक सच्ची जो इन्वेंशन है उसी को मिलेगा, थोड़ी बहुत चेंज करने से पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा. और दूसरा ये है कि तो थोड़ी बहुत चेंजेस होंगे, पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा, तो वो वाले प्रोडक्ट जो है वो इंडियन कंपनीज फिर बना पाएंगे अगर मेन मॉलिक्यूल को पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा. इसमें प्राइसेस पे यही असर होगा कि अगर एक ही पेटेंट मिलेगा एक प्रोडक्ट को, बार बार पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा अगर, तो फिर बाकी इंडियन कंपनीज जो है वो सब बना सकती हैं फिर पेटेंट, फिर प्रोडक्ट।
जो सेक्शन 3D एंड 3D की बात हो रही थी, उसको यहाँ नहीं किया।
3D को सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये बोला है कि ये एक क्वालिफाइंग क्राइटेरिया है, मतलब ये एक क्राइटेरिया फॉलो करना ही पड़ेगा जब पेटेंट्स लेते हैं दवाइयों के लिए।
याचिका को खारिज करते हुए सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी कोई ऑब्जर्वेशन भी दिया अपने फैसले में?
याचिका को खारिज करते हुए सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये बोला कि नोवार्टिस पे और अमाउंट अभी बताया नहीं। उन्होंने ये बोला कि नोवार्टिस का जो प्रोडक्ट है, जो दवाई है, उसको पेटेंट नहीं मिल सकता।
और खास पॉइंट्स क्या क्या हैं जो जजमेंट सुनाया कोर्ट ने? उसके
खास पॉइंट यही बोला है कि जो सेक्शन 3D है इंडिया ने जो इनैक्ट किया है, वो एक जजमेंट, वो एक प्रोविजन है जिसकी वजह से वो दवाइयों को बहुत ज्यादा पेटेंटिंग बार बार नहीं मिलेगी, और वो सही प्रोविजन है।
थैंक यू मैम।
Okay, we're also joined now by the women lawyer Harpreet Singh. She was
Josie John, Managing Editor, Business Today, who joins us. Josie, how significant is this verdict of the Supreme Court? Put into perspective for us what it means for the pharma sector and the scores of cancer patients who are looking for cheaper versions of this drug.
It's very big news, but pretty much on expected lines. What the court has basically upheld is the right of the country's patents and trademarks regime to hold up drugs which are very expensive for consumers and say that, hey, it's not possible and we are kind of revoking your patent and your right to kind of charge monopoly pricing. Now, this particular drug, Glivec, was selling for as much as about more than upwards of $1 lakh for a month treatment for a cancer patient, and typically these treatment protocols run into a year or more. So it's pretty much unaffordable for anybody in India. And the court has basically said that these prices will just not work in India. A big blow for large multinational pharma companies which are fighting other patent battles, similar patent battles in India. There are other companies like Roche and others also who are being kind of asked to kind of reduce their prices. So overall, a big blow for multinational pharma companies, and so going forward, Indian patent holders, if they kind of charge anti-competitive pricing in the market, the message going through is that the regulatory regime will step in and clamp down on pricing. Now, the big question is the balance that the regulatory regime kind of keeps while deciding such cases. Broadly, the perspective is that these prices were completely out of reach of the average Indian, and the prices had to come down, and that's where the Supreme Court decision.
Like, Josie, how are global pharma majors going to look at this Supreme Court verdict?
Sorry, beg your pardon?
How are global pharmaceutical companies going to look at the Supreme Court verdict?
So lots of Indian pharma companies are what are called generic drug manufacturers, or they do variants of large pharma companies' products, and for them the broad message is positive, because if the patent is not upheld in India, they can make those at far less lower prices. So, for example, Cipla has similar drugs which cost as less as about 4,000, 5,000 rupees a month versus 1 lakh a month kind of thing. So for them, the message is, hey, you have a market to kind of tap into. But that is a slightly skewed way of looking, because at the end of the day, it's the big innovator company which is pumping in the billions of dollars to kind of develop a drug like this,
right.
And somebody else taking advantage of that is not strictly good economics. But here in this case, at least in cancer drugs, broadly, and this is, by the way, this is not just India. Other countries like Thailand, Brazil have
right.
taken similar stances, saying that we will not allow, anti-competitive pricing which masses can't afford.
Right. Very, very interesting. Josie, do stay on with us. Let me go across to YK Sapru, who is with the Cancer Patients Aid Association of India. Dr. Sapru, how do you see this verdict of the Supreme Court? Certainly comes as good news for a lot of cancer patients across the country and the world.
Yeah, I think this is a really great news for us, and this was a landmark judgment because on the basis of this, several other patent drugs would be judged whether evergreening would be permitted or not permitted. By rejecting the opposition to 3D, the Supreme Court has done a real great job and in making the anti-cancer drugs affordable for the poor cancer patients. Our fight, which was over a decade long, in this period we have given, since the drug has been available, that is, Glivec is available at generic price, we have given to over 5,000 people Glivec generic free, which I mean saving lives of 5,000 people from one drug alone.
All right, Dr. Sapru, thank you for joining us with your thoughts. Let me go back to Josie, Managing Editor, Business Today, who's still with us. Josie, does this entire episode once again shine a light on the debate of monopolistic practices of giant pharmaceutical companies, not just in India, but across the world, when it comes to life-saving drugs?
Absolutely. So there has to be a balance, like I said earlier, right? Because these companies do spend billions of dollars developing these drugs, and there has to be a payback for them. So from their perspective, this is completely unfair. They've spent so much money developing a drug, and they want to be compensated. So what needs to evolve across the world is not just India, some kind of mechanism to compensate them for the kind of money they have spent developing these drugs. Like I said earlier, it's a little unfair to them that they've spent this much money and they expect to reap, benefit of that spending, and they're not allowed to do that. Now, anti-MNC activists would say that, hey, this is monopolistic pricing and this is profiteering from a drug at the cost of humankind, and it should not be allowed. That's also a very, very valid perspective, but some kind of a balance needs to be found.
Is there any option for Novartis at this point in time? Are they likely to, seek a review petition on this? Do they have any hopes legally in India?
Yeah, so Novartis has made very clear that they firmly believe in their side of things here, and they will fight to the end for this. So I imagine there would be a review petition coming up from them. But, India's stance across regulatory bodies and judiciary has been consistent on this, that, hey, this is unfair pricing. You have to kind of reach out to the masses, make it affordable to the masses, and it's not fair. Despite Novartis and other multinational companies claiming what they call the patient programs, as they call it. They say that if you meet a certain criteria, they make it affordable for you. Now, they talk about outreach programs as much as 95% of patient samples, but it's not clear how far that reaches, how many people have been reached out to. But if you go to cancer centers across the country, it's very clear that the cancer drugs are just not reaching India's millions or thousands and hundreds of thousands of cancer patients.
Right. Josie, will this verdict have an impact on the R&D, research and development plans of these multinational companies, these gigantic pharma companies in India? Do you see that impacting the way they go about their R&D in the near future?
Yeah, so it's not so much R&D in India as much as R&D in general, and that entire business model is under a cloud across the world. Like I said, this is not just India; it's Thailand, Brazil, and other countries which are following this kind of taking this kind of a stance that we will not allow you to do this kind of pricing. Now, so the entire business model is spending billions of dollars on a particular drug, and coming out with a blockbuster drug is under a big question mark in global pharma. So the global pharma itself is changing. And to that extent, whatever little R&D activity that they have in India will also change. But like I said, it's not much of R&D doesn't happen, of global pharma does not happen in India. So there is very little impact locally on R&D efforts.
All right, Josie John, thank you very much indeed for joining us with perspective on this very, very important Supreme Court verdict, which is a landmark verdict with far-reaching consequences. The plea of Swiss pharma giant Novartis AG has been rejected by the Supreme Court for getting its blood cancer drug Glivec patented in India. This really paves the way for the continued production of the drug's generic version, the cheaper version of the drug, by Indian companies for millions across the country and across the world that want to access this life-saving drug at cheaper costs. Let's in fact listen in what the counsel in the Supreme Court had to say.
That whichever standard you adopt to interpret Section 3D, Novartis's product Glivec does not constitute for patent in India.
What are the grounds for this particular judgment? What they have said?
Okay, Supreme Court has said that the product imatinib mesylate, जो chemical है, it was known prior to 95 through an earlier patent of Novartis. So the new patent cannot be granted because it is just a little modification of the old one.
What does it mean for the planned drug makers in India, ma'am, now with this, the implications on them?
There could be various implications on this. However, one implication is clear that the Indian provision, Section 3D, has been completely upheld. Number one. Number two, patents will be granted only for genuine inventions and repetitive patenting will not be allowed.
What are the implications for the planned drug?
Yes, the court held that merely because Glivec is more soluble or more stable, it doesn't qualify by itself for patent protection.
हिंदी में बता दें मैम कि what does it mean that when it comes to cheaper drugs in India?
Yes,
What does this judgment mean?
that whatever patents are granted will be only for genuine inventions and the generic medicines would be available in India and for the world because India is the pharmacy of the world.
कोर्ट के इस जजमेंट का क्या मतलब निकाला जाए कि सस्ती दवाइयां मिलेंगी?
कोर्ट के जजमेंट से ये मतलब निकाला जाता है, दो मतलब है. एक तो जो पेटेंट है वो एक सच्ची जो इन्वेंशन है उसी को मिलेगा, थोड़ी बहुत चेंज करने से पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा. और दूसरा ये है कि जो थोड़ी बहुत चेंजेस होंगी पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा तो वो वाले प्रोडक्ट्स जो हैं वो इंडियन कंपनीज फिर बना पाएंगे अगर मेन मॉलिक्यूल को पेटेंट नहीं मिलता. इसमें प्राइसेस पे यही असर होगा कि अगर एक ही पेटेंट मिलेगा एक प्रोडक्ट को, बार बार पेटेंट नहीं मिलेगा अगर, तो फिर बाकी इंडियन कंपनीज जो है वो सब बना सकती हैं फिर पेटेंट, फिर प्रोडक्ट.
सेक्शन 3D एंड 3D की बात हो रही है, उसको यहाँ मेंटेन किया है.
3D को सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये बोला है कि ये एक क्वालिफाइंग क्राइटेरिया है, मतलब ये एक क्राइटेरिया फॉलो करना ही पड़ेगा जब पेटेंट्स लेते हैं मद दवाइयों के लिए.
मैम याचिका को खारिज करते वक्त सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी कुछ ऑब्जर्वेशन भी दिया अपने फैसले में?
याचिका को खारिज करते हुए सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये बोला है कि नोवार्टिस है और अमाउंट अभी बताया नहीं. ने ये बोला कि नोवार्टिस का जो प्रोडक्ट है, जो दवाई है, उसको पेटेंट नहीं मिल सका.
और खास पॉइंट क्या क्या है जो जजमेंट सुनाया कोर्ट ने? उसके
खास पॉइंट यही बोला है कि जो सेक्शन 3D है इंडिया ने जो इनेक्ट किया है वो एक जजमेंट, वो एक प्रोविजन है जिसकी वजह से वो दवाइयों को बहुत ज्यादा पेटेंटिंग बार बार मिलेगी और वो सही प्रोविजन है.
थैंक यू.
Well, Novartis's appeal on the cancer drug has been dismissed by the Supreme Court. You just heard the counsel there talking to us of the basis on which the Supreme Court has dismissed their appeal for a patent. Let me go across to my colleague Atir Khan, who's tracking the story. Atir, put into perspective for us exactly on what basis the Supreme Court has dismissed Novartis's appeal.
Well, Rukmini, we are yet to get a detailed order, but what we understand is that the Supreme Court was not convinced that Novartis had fulfilled the requirements of Indian Intellectual Property Appellate Board. And also we know that this verdict was to determine whether India gets to limit patents to genuine new drugs or whether drug companies get to evergreen their patents by simply, by repatenting a slightly modified version of any known substance. So clearly the court is of the view that the practice of evergreening will not be encouraged, and also the choice of life-saving drugs being available to the patients at a cheaper cost will be given. So there'll be a wider choice for the patients to avail the medicines which will save their lives, not just for cancer and even HIV problems.
Right. In fact, as you said, Atir, this bit of news, this verdict will come as a huge boost to a lot of patients suffering from cancer, not only in India but across the world. They have groups like Doctors Without Borders that have always accessed cheap generic drugs from India, life-saving drugs from India to save lives across the world. But what are the legal options that Novartis is likely to explore now?
Well, we know that this order has come from the apex court. The company has an option of going in for revision petition, but then it looks unlikely that it will be entertained. The reason being that the court has felt in its wisdom that a choice needs to be given to the patients to avail the medicines which they think is best suitable for them. So therefore, the choice is important, and also the practice of evergreening has been discouraged by the court.
Right. Arthur, did the Supreme Court say anything as to why it is pronouncing this judgment and what it really means for the millions of people who are suffering from cancer across the world?
Rukmini, as I told you that we are yet to get a detailed order, but of what we understand is that court is of the view that the Novartis did not fulfill the requirements of intellectual property appellate board also. The case was taken up there. However, it is of the view that evergreen is not in the interest of patients in India and abroad, and hence this order.
Right, Arthur, you've hit a very important point. The evergreening of patent rights is a strategy which is used by innovators and pharmaceutical companies across the world. These patents make these kind of life-saving drugs completely inaccessible in many ways. But this verdict of the Supreme Court will come as a huge relief for cancer patients. Novartis, for its part, has been maintaining that they have really invested a lot of money in developing this life-saving drug, and that it is not fair to them. But we'll have to wait and watch what Novartis has to say on the Supreme Court judgment. They do also, they are likely to explore legal options. They are likely to seek a review petition. But for now, this judgment will have far-reaching implications not only for cancer patients across the country, but across the world, as many doctors, many NGOs, many companies across the world access cheaper versions of the generic drugs that are manufactured in India, life-saving drugs. And this, of course, brings back the light, Arthur, if you're still with me, on this entire debate on life-saving drugs and big pharmaceutical companies patenting them.
Well, that's right. Absolutely. We know that though Novartis had, quoted several provisions of the patent law, which goes 2005 patent law, which is aiming to prevent fresh patents from making minor changes. So the court, in its wisdom, has thought that the patients need a choice, and therefore it not be binding that they should only get expensive medicines. So therefore there should be a choice, and the drug manufacturer should be encouraged to provide generic medicines, and the monopoly sort of evergreening practice of big pharmas should not be encouraged.
Right. In fact, let me give a perspective to our viewers as to how expensive Glivec has been. Glivec is a life-saving cancer drug which has been used in treating chronic myeloid leukemia and costs about 1.2 lakh rupees per month. That's what we've been telling you. The cheaper version of this drug just costs about 8,000 rupees per month. That is how wide the price differential is. And it really comes down to the affordability of a life-saving drug like this for the average cancer patient who is suffering from this terminal illness. And this verdict comes as a huge boost to cancer patients, not just in India, but across the world. Like I told you, a lot of NGOs and a lot of pharmaceutical companies are accessing India for the cheaper generic forms of this drug. Aditi Antanarayanan is with us for more. Aditi, a huge verdict with far-reaching implications.
Definitely, Rukmini, this comes as a very good news for the Indian pharma companies and the NGOs who had been fighting against Novartis' plea that they should get the monopoly, they should get the patent for the drug. In fact, this also comes as a good news for the consumers, because this means that the drug will now be cheaper for the people, because definitely the people should have the option of purchasing the kind of drugs they want. And if Novartis did get the monopoly, that meant that it would be very, very expensive. So this, the Supreme Court judgment does come as a very good news for not only the pharma companies but also for the consumers, because it does give them an option on deciding which life-saving drug they want to use, Rukmini.